Hi, my name is Vanessa Otero, and I'm the founder and CEO of Adfontes Media. And today we're going to take a deep dive into our methodology, but not just our methodology. We're actually going to cover our taxonomy, our methodology, and frequently asked questions. So let's dive right into it, shall we? I'm going to share my screen here. You're probably familiar with the media bias chart, which is a static image. It usually has about 120 sources on there. We come out with different editions of it throughout the year, and that gets shared on social media. But we have an interactive version as well. If you go to our website, you can see our free version and search all sorts of news sources. And I'm just going to start out with walking you through a blank version of the media bias chart to talk about our taxonomy, which is our system of categorizing our sources for reliability and bias. So we're going to start over here on the left with this y-axis for reliability. So generally, from top to bottom, like at the top is better and the middle is okay and the bottom is not so good. But what do we mean by our taxonomy for reliability? Like, what are we rating? So there's a scale from 0 to 64, and we have, sort of a lot of reasons for that. But in general, what's scores 40 and above is highly reliable. So we'll rate individual articles in this section, and when an overall source falls above 40, generally it's highly reliable. What do we put at the top of that system? Like, what's at the apex of the media bias chart? It's original fact reporting that's high effort. So investigative journalism, the kind of stuff that journalists do really well, that's at the very top. But there's also other sorts of reliable information out there that's not that investigative reporting, like thorough fact reporting or fact-dense analysis can be very reliable. And you can also have articles that are like a mix of fact reporting and analysis, or even simple fact reporting. These can be even simple, local news stories that will rate above 40. Now, between 24 and 40 is sort of a mixed bag, and a lot of content in our media ecosystem lands in here. You've got lots of opinion and analysis. So analysis tends to fall between 32 and 40, opinion between 24 and 32. But you'll notice here that it says or analysis or wide variation in reliability, and opinion or wide variation in reliability. And that's because like an individual article is going to fall in like analysis or opinion, but an overall source, it can, there are a lot of them out there that have really reliable stuff and then some not so good stuff in a mix in between. So it can fall in the middle for that reason. But generally, the sources that are towards the top of that range, like, 30, 38, 39, like those are still usually quite reliable. Whereas the sources that fall towards the bottom, like, 24, 25, 26, got some issues, right? Now, if a source falls below 24, that's when it starts to become pretty problematic. So this area between 16 and 24, we actually for shorthand call that the problematic section, because it's stuff that's worse than opinion, but maybe it's not overtly or all that frequently misleading or inaccurate, right? So it can be in this section for a few reasons, like it's selective or incomplete, or it uses unfair persuasion. What do we mean by unfair persuasion? Well, content that's attacks people, like uses ad hominem, insults, dehumanization, vilification, that kind of stuff is it's worse than just opinion, right? And then we've got stuff that falls below 16 and below 8. And we call these contains misleading information or contains inaccurate or fabricated information. We actually stay away from the terms misinformation and disinformation because those terms have become so polarized and co-opted already. So we want to be really specific, like when something contains misleading information, like we've pulled out something that we've identified as misleading, and something that's been identified as inaccurate. So let's move to bias. So the left-right spectrum, at first glance, it seems intuitive. Okay, like we get like left and right. But when you really think about it, there's a lot more to it, right? So what falls in the middle? Notice at the middle, it doesn't say neutral and it doesn't say unbiased, because really there's no such thing as unbiased, right? But things can still fall in the middle, and they fall in the middle for three reasons. One, It can be something that's truly minimally biased, like the article or the episode is trying to convey the information in as straightforward a manner as possible with like few adjectives. It can also fall in the middle because it presents a centrist position, but centrism is itself a bias, right? So it can fall in the middle there for that kind of bias. It can also mean a balance of biases. So if you have something on the left and something on the right, it can even be pretty far apart, but it would, balance out to the middle. Again, it can fall in the middle for that reason. And for those reasons, we're not saying that middle is best, right? Higher is better, right? But you can see there's things on the chart that fall in the middle that are like high, and there are things that are low, right? So middle is not best. And we're not even saying that bias itself is bad. Like liberal and conservative positions, we're not saying those are bad. We actually need them. These are like the foundational principles that we base our morals on, right? Like we actually need to be able to debate liberal and conservative, left and right positions in order to advance our society. But the further out you go in terms of the bias, the higher correlation there is with lower reliability, right? So it goes out middle, skews left, skews right, skews strong left, strong right, hyperpartisan left and right, most extreme left and right. And we anchor this left-right axis on three specific things. One, it's US, two, it's contemporary, and three, it's positions of elected officials. So let's go through that. US. Why is this a US-based spectrum? Well, because we have to anchor it geographically, given that the left-right spectrum is different in Canada, it's different in France, it's different in Saudi Arabia. It's just different all over the world, no matter where you are. And we have primarily US analysts, so we look at this from a US perspective for now. We also use a contemporary anchor, meaning that it's what is left and right now. And that changes over time. You may have heard of the concept of the Overton window. This is sort of a related concept that like what's left and right changes over time because what's left and right was different 4 years ago and 8 years ago and 50 years ago. It's going to be different 4, 8, 50 years from now. We also anchor this on the positions of elected officials in this country. Why? Well, because they're the most concrete things to anchor it on. You've got the statements that folks make on TV, on Twitter, on their party platforms. You have their policy positions that are easy to anchor around left and right. Okay, so let's go into how we actually rate the news sources individually themselves. I'm going to populate this chart with website news sources that we've rated. And then I'm going to populate it with TV and podcasts as well, because these are the different types of information sources that we rate. So just as this is loading up here, why do we rate the information sources that we've got on here? What we rate is news and news-like information. And that can include everything from traditional journalism, as we think of, is a lot of people like to think of the news, but people get their information from all sorts of other sources: magazines, opinion blogs, podcasts, and a lot of those are not things that are journalism. They don't even hold themselves out to be journalism. But why do we rate it? Well, we rate anything that's news and news-like if people are making they're getting information upon which they're making decisions that affect their lives, like decisions about who to vote for or like what to do in their day-to-day lives. So you'll see, like why do we rate, like Joe Rogan's podcast or a misleading or like fake news site? Well, people get their information from there just as much as they get their information from like TikTok and YouTube. So we rate YouTube channels just like they get their information from AP. That's one of a very highly reliable source on our chart. So let's dive into how we rate individual sources, sources meaning like publishers. So I'm just going to pull up some examples here. If you go to our website, you can search for any of the thousands of news sources we have rated so far. And I'm just going to pull up one example. So here is the New York Times. The New York Times, if you scroll on, you can see that overall logo. It it falls in the skews left section, and it falls into this mix of fact reporting and analysis. So it's a highly reliable source. But why? So if you look at the individual dots that are splayed out all across, there's a mix of articles that are minimally biased in fact reporting. So let's take a look at some of these articles. Let's just take a look at this one. Okay, so this article, melting ice reveals mummified penguins in Antarctica. So this is actually a great article about penguins, but it's not politically biased. It's a fact reporting article, so that's why it falls up here, right? But then you've got from the same publication articles like this one. This one is labeled opinion. It says, let's call it Trump virus. If you're feeling awful, you know who to blame. So just from the headline there, you can tell that it's an opinion article, right? So how did each one of these articles get rated? Well, I'll dive into that in more detail in a second, but we have for each one of these articles, panels of 3 analysts at a time. Now we have currently 60 analysts on our roster. And they're the 3 analysts at a time who rate each article. One's left, one's right, one's center, politically speaking. Across our cohort of analysts, they're also diverse across age, race, and gender, and other personal characteristics, because the diversity across experience and across viewpoints is really important. Because when we're talking about things like how reliable is something or how biased is something, as you all know, that's a very sensitive, delicate topic, right? People disagree. So folks that are, you can take a look at these articles, and whether you're left-leaning or right-leaning or center-leaning, you can say, yeah, this one's a fact reporting article and this one's a left-leaning opinion article. So the overall score is a weighted average of the individual article samples that we rate. Another question you'll see articles. Here's on the Wall Street Journal. It's over to the right, and it's also got these minimally biased fact reporting articles, but then it's also got right-leaning opinion and analysis. So a couple questions that people ask us all the time is, do we separate opinion and analysis? And yeah, we do, right? So fact reporting is a 40 and above, and analysis and opinion, those are rated in these lower sections. So we are the ones that will identify whether something is analysis or opinion versus fact reporting. And the reason we do that is because, the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, although they, like a traditional news organization, will separate the difference between fact reporting and opinion, most news sources and most information sources do not do that, right? Think of evening TV shows, right? So let me just, I'll populate a few others here. So think of like MSNBC and CNN and Fox News on TV. There is some content that's more like news and more like opinion on each of those channels. But if you ever watch it during the day, they never say, and now we're switching to our opinion section. Right? There are a lot of like great analytical like news magazines out there like Reason or Vox that are all analysis. They don't label it as analysis. It just is, right? So we as individual news consumers and we as raters of the news are the ones that make those determinations based on the content that's in there. Okay. So here you see lots of individual sources. I'll pull up, let's see, let me just show you some ways that you can search this chart and show you like differences between how we rate individual like shows on a network. So I mentioned Fox and MSNBC, right? If we just pull them up, if you look at the chart right here, you can there are a number of different ways that you can search by local, national, international. You can also search by ownership on our data platform. Let's pick Fox News Media. Okay. All right. So this is across websites, TV, podcasts, and audio. So a lot of it goes from like right in the middle to hyper partisan right, and from like highly reliable all the way down to not very reliable. Right. So the folks that like Fox News will often point to the things that are like highly reliable and minimally biased and say, it's a good news source. And in that case, they're right, but people who don't like Fox News will point to things that are more biased and less reliable. And, they're also right. So it really depends on the sample that you consume and what you think about as a news consumer that informs most people's viewpoint of how good or bad a news source is. Let's take a look at CNN. Get MSNBC as well, but for CNN, you've got some podcasts that are right in the middle. You've got the website up here, but the TV network down here, and then individual TV shows. So we break this up and rate them on the individual like format, like the website, TV, or podcast. We also break them up according to individual shows. So when I mentioned that we do, let's do just MSNBC, just to be thorough here, get the major cable channels. Okay, so the cable stuff, it skews left, and then we've got from higher reliability to lower reliability and more or less biased over to the left, right? But there's a difference between shows on each one of these channels. So what we do for getting a good sample of each one of these is like we take representative samples over time for all these thousands of articles and thousands of publishers, shows, and podcasts. So we have like a minimum sample of shows or episodes that we'll use to get onto the chart, and then we'll update them over time. So the ones that we've had, like the most popular stuff that we've had since 2019, we have hundreds and hundreds of articles for many of those sources, and we're continuously updating the most popular ones on a monthly and quarterly basis. Some of the newer stuff has fewer samples, but we add to it over time. But we're adding new articles and new episodes to this every day. So how do our analysts actually rate this stuff? Right? Let's dive into that part because that's super fun. So when they're, and by the way, when they rate an episode of audio or video, they're literally sitting there and watching it together in real time. So I'm going to pull up our backend system so you can get a little bit of a snapshot, a look into our system. It's called CART, Content Analysis Rating Tool. And when analysts show up for their shifts, analysts are in shifts of 3 hours at a time, and they will get a slate of articles that they're going to rate during their shift. So these shifts are going on all day, every day, 7 days a week, and we've been doing that for almost 3 years now. So to date, this is April 2023. We've rated about 53,000 individual pieces of content. It's a lot. All right, so they'll have this list. So let's take a look. They'll click on rate, and they'll see a article in here. Let's pop that out. Okay, so this is from Western Journal, and this is generally like a right-leaning, not very reliable site. And this is labeled as commentary, right? So commentary is usually like opinion, but again, we make those judgments ourselves. It says, DeSantis vindicated of COVID cover-up after media darling, quote, whistleblower ends up in complete disgrace. What a surprise, so-and-so is a complete fraud, right? So you can sort of get just from seeing the first few sentences that there's some bias, some right-leaning bias here already, okay? So what do we do with these articles? Well, we measure a number of things about that. We'll pull a bunch of stats like automatically, like the word count, sentence count, number of questions, different parts of speech we count up, and then ratios of parts of speech to each other. And we primarily use that for machine learning model training because, eventually doing all these articles with machine learning will help us cover just a lot more, right? But all of our ratings right now are based on manual individual ratings, so it's 53,000, okay? Then we have this blank media bias chart, and this will give you a little sense of what our analysts get trained on, okay? So our analysts, let me stop for a second, I'll come right back to this. all of our analysts go through about 30 hours of training before they first start, and then over 40 hours of ongoing training throughout the year, because we train every single week, just to make sure that we're up on the latest developments in our methodology. So we're always adding new stuff because we're always coming across new content. So our analysts, we're primarily looking for in analysts is strong reading comprehension and analytic skills, and also good U.S. political knowledge and worldwide political knowledge. So the primary backgrounds of our analysts are journalists, teachers, librarians. We have a number of PhD students and recent PhD graduates. We also have a handful of lawyers, and then other folks who have careers spanning across, across various different types that are just passionate about what we do. So we're actually always hiring analysts. So pop on over to our webpage if you're interested in becoming one, and you can apply there. But yeah, right now we have about 60. So lots of training in our methodology. So let me just go back and share here. Like the rubric that we're actually grading on. This is content analysis. Ad fontes is Latin for to the source, because we're actually looking at the source, looking at the content to tell us information about the content. So if you look over to the left, there are these sliders. This is a blank media bias chart. And so there's a 1 to 5 scale for rating the headline and the graphic. There's a 1 to 5 scale for rating expression. And what we mean by expression is how the content is presented. Like, is it presented as fact, presented as analysis, presented as opinion, or like a mix in between from 1 to 5, okay? Then there's veracity. And this is the thing that people think that reliability is entirely. Like, veracity, of course, is a huge part of reliability. Like, how true is something, right? But it's usually not like a binary true or false, because things can be like mostly true down to mostly false, or things can be true and very certain, or uncertain, or they can be false and very certain, right? So this is a veracity scale, and this part of our methodology is really in depth. It's like fact checking plus. So yes, we do fact checking, but we also rate veracity and score articles for claims that cannot be fact checked. And that's a big part of our media ecosystem. Like, opinion claims cannot be fact checked, but they have different levels of veracity or likelihood of veracity. So that rolls up to an overall reliability score. And there's a number of like tertiary factors that sometimes come into play. Then when we're talking about bias, we're looking at language, political position, and comparison. Okay, so what do we mean by this? Most people think of political position, right? And that's certainly part of it. Like, an article can advocate for or against a policy position, or for or against a particular candidate. But then there's also the language. So there's how you characterize the positions and how you characterize your political opponents. Comparison is a metric that encompasses several things like topic selection or omission, right? Because so many people know that if it's not just how you cover a certain thing, it's what you choose to cover in the first place, right? So individual articles can have bias by omission or topic selection, and then entire sources can have topics selection or omission bias, right? So that rolls up to an overall score, and then our analysts will pull in citations from the text itself, especially if they score low or extremely biased, and then they compare their scores to each other. So they'll see each other's scores and they'll discuss any discrepancies. So typically they're on the same page right off the bat. If they have some differences based on their own perception and things they know, and they will bring those to their peers, adjust their scores. And then this is sort of rare, but when it needs to go to a second panel, if they can't agree, it goes to a second panel, we elevate it that way. Okay, so every single one of our articles, every single one of our episodes goes through this process. It's a rigorous, painstaking process, but we find the most accurate way to really get a snapshot of what an overall source's reliability is. Let's cover a couple more frequently asked questions. One of them is, how do we select the content from a particular news source? Because what we're selecting is a representative sample. Okay, so when we first come across a news source, we have a proxy call like the most prominent methodology. So the things that are displayed on a website the most prominently, like above the fold, and in the things that are presented like right at the top and that are highlighted and bigger, those are the most prominent articles. So we'll select those, 5 to 10 from a particular day, but we make sure that we select across several news cycles. So at least across like 2 weeks or so of news cycles, we'll pick different days, like at least 3 of them throughout that, in order to get our initial rating, and then to put it up on the chart. And as I mentioned, we will refresh those ratings ongoingly, and for the most popular sources, we rate them the most frequently. The more obscure ones, we rate a little less frequently. How do we know if we have a representative sample? Well, by having a minimum sample, we can tell if there are like outliers within that sample, or whether all of them tend to like cluster around the same area. So there are some news sources like all their content is very much the same, right? So if we get 15 articles, 30 articles, or even if it's like 3 episodes, 5 episodes, we can say like all of these scored pretty much in the same area. But sometimes we'll get a sample like that and we'll see that there are outliers, and then we'll get a much bigger sample until the data stabilizes around a score where like new articles and shows don't tend to change the score very much. So it works pretty well, and we are constantly seeking to improve it, right? By getting additional articles added to our sample. Super important. So that's a deep dive into our Adfontes Media methodology and our taxonomy and some of our frequently asked questions. We're always adding to and improving this. This has gotten a lot better over time, over the last few years. And now our data is cited in well over a dozen academic papers. And we're really proud of that. We want our data to be to contribute to the body of research that goes into studying misinformation. I said we didn't say that word very much, but generally broadly, and extreme polarization, because what we do, what we're all about is bringing people together. So this chart has a way of bringing people together. Even though people can disagree and argue about it, they can generally agree that like some things are more reliable, some things are less, some things are left and right, and some things are way out there. And how we do that is by literally bringing people together on our shifts from right, left, and center, and from across different experiences in the United States and soon across the world. We'll be adding more international sources soon. And we'd love to hear from you. If you got any feedback for us, email us at info@adfontesmedia.com. Thanks.